Mr. Rakes,
Yes.
please come forward.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning. It's my understanding you failed to appear earlier, but a show cause was issued and not a bench warrant. I'm going to ask that you come back on Thursday, February 9th at 8:30 in the morning.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Snead.
May I proceed?
You may.
Thank you. Good morning again. Isaac Snead, on behalf of the people of the state of Michigan and the prosecutor's office. Thank you for coming today. Thank you for your service. It is important. That's why you have the comfortable chairs. So I'm going to get started here and let you know why are we here. Primarily some bizarre behavior by the defendant between September 2021 and January 2022 that led to 2 criminal charges against him for stalking a former neighbor and for stalking his ex-wife. Defendant is charged with the following crimes. Again, as the judge indicated, the crime of stalking. Stalking has 5 elements to it. Think of that like a checklist. So when the trial is over, you can go through those elements and check them off one by one if you found that those elements have been satisfied after you hear the testimony that's presented at the trial. Element 1 of stalking is that the defendant committed 2 or more acts of unconsented contact with an individual. Unconsented contact includes, for example, following an individual unconsentedly, appearing within the sight of that individual, approaching an individual in a public space or on private property, and appearing at an individual's residence. Here, the evidence will show with both victims the element of unconsented contact by the defendant against them will be satisfied. Element 2 of stalking is that the contact causes an individual emotional distress. You can note that emotional distress does not require medical or professional treatment. And you'll hear the testimony of the former neighbor and the defendant's ex-wife that they did suffer emotional distress by his actions. Element 3 of stalking, the contact would cause a reasonable individual emotional distress. And what is a reasonable individual in the law? It's a term of art that we define. A reasonable person you can think of like a metaphor. A person is the personification of a community ideal of reasonable behavior. A person who gets up in the morning and brushes their teeth and makes their bed and all of those things. The term refers to an ordinary person who exercises care, avoiding streams of boldness and carefulness, both. Element 4 of stalking, the contact by a defendant would cause an individual to feel, and for this case we're using the 3 terms. We're not worried about being molested or anything like that, but that is in the statute. We're worried about these victims who were frightened, intimidated, and harassed by the defendant. And again, the final element being that the unconsented contact did in fact cause these victims to feel frightened, intimidated, or harassed by the defendant. And you'll hear their testimony. We have the first witness, Maritza Martinez. She was the former neighbor of the defendant. She'll testify to the events she underwent between September of 21 and January of 22, acts of intimidation and harassment by the defendant that led her ultimately contacting City of Tecumseh Police. You'll hear from Sergeant Walsh from Tecumseh Police, who had his own firsthand observations. He interviewed the victim and the witness, ultimately leading to extra patrols by Ms. Martinez's house in the city of Tecumseh. He observed firsthand cameras attached to both the rear and back of the defendant's pickup truck that he would park in a manner so it would face the neighbor's home. You'll hear testimony from Dawn McKenzie, the defendant's ex-wife, excuse me. She's a victim. They had been divorced 3 years as of January of 22 when these actions took place. Acts of intimidation and harassment, again, ultimately leading to Tecumseh police being contacted. And you'll hear from Sergeant Wright, also from Tecumseh Police. He investigated the stalking of Ms. McKenzie. He had an interaction which lasted approximately 25 minutes, he noted in his report with Mr. Kroswek as well. At the end of the trial, we're going to be asking you to find a verdict of guilty of stalking for both Ms. Martinez and both Ms. McKenzie. With that checklist, I'm presenting it to you here. There will be evidence presented beyond a reasonable doubt of 2 or more unconsented contacts with the victims by the defendant. You'll hear their testimony of emotional distress, and I believe based upon that, you'll conclude a reasonable person would have suffered emotional distress, as well as feeling threatened, harassed, or intimidated, and that he then is guilty of stalking these 2 women. I have nothing further for opening, Your Honor. Thank you.
Mr. Kroswek, opening statement.
Yes, sir. Good morning. As I said, my name is Stephen Kroswek. I'm self-represented, pro per. We are here to argue 2 counts of misdemeanor stalking brought forth by the Tecumseh PD, my ex-wife's attorney, and that same attorney, Michael J. Brooks, also represents another witness, Ms. Martinez, who lived 3 doors down from me, and Barry Purse. He represents the Purse Funeral Home in Tecumseh. I will prove there was a lack of probable cause for the arrest by the Tecumseh PD, Sergeants Walsh and Wright. I will prove there's been a lack of evidence for this prosecutor to continue with these cases. There are 3 sides to every story. This morning, Mr. Snead will give the side of the state's story. I will share the side of my story, which will be firsthand from me. And then there's a 3rd side to every story, and that's the truth. The truth you'll find in the evidence in this case. I will present real and credible evidence, independent, without bias. It'll be video evidence. I have a lot of video evidence. I'm a videographer, is what I do as a hobby. The people's case will lack any real evidence. From their side, you will hear a lot of testimony that isn't backed up by any truth or facts. There will be tons of allegations and accusations and lies. I have not broken any laws. I have not committed any crimes. Taking video and photos in public is your constitutional right. It's a First Amendment right that we all have.